Hello, amazing savvy entrepreneur. It's Tash Corbin here, and welcome to another episode of the Heart-Centered Business Podcast. This is episode number 352, which means you can find all the relevant links and show notes for today's episode over at tashcorbin.com/352. Today's podcast episode is answering a question, and that question is bribing people to be on your mailing list even appropriate? Is it wrong? I'm really excited to answer this question, so let's dive in. I'm Tash Corbin, and this is the Heart-Centered Business Podcast. Now, before I answer the question about bribing people onto your mailing list, because I think it's such a great question, I'm super excited to talk about it. I just wanted to quickly give a shout out to Laurie, who sent through a question at tashcorbin.com/question. And it was in relation to choosing an email marketing service. So like a CRM where you send your newsletters out and send your emails out. And I have already answered part of that question in a previous podcast episode, but there was a little piece of it that I hadn't answered. So I just wanted to quickly touch on that as well, because we're talking about mailing lists today. So first and foremost, how to choose the best CRM or email service for your business. I did as another podcast episode, tashcorbin.com/309. I'll link to that in the show notes of today's podcast. But also, one of the reasons why Laurie was asking was because she is currently with an email provider and she's worried about how hard it is to move from service to service. So her question was more about, should I choose one based on what I need now, or should I choose one based on what I'm going to need into the future, because I'm worried, is it going to be super hard to move from one to the next? Now, the answer to that question is actually no, it's fairly simple and straightforward to move from one to the next. Of course, it depends on how long you've had your mailing list, how many of those tags and pieces of data on each lead you're going to need to move. There are definitely people who can help you do that at a very low cost price. You can find someone on Fiverr. Let me know if you want someone. I know some people who specialize in moving people, and it's not necessarily a significant investment to do that. So the process of moving to a new provider isn't necessarily that hard. But I wanted to answer this on the podcast because it's important to ensure that the first few emails that you send from your new platform have low unsubscribe rates and have good open rates. Because when you first move to a new service, it doesn't know your history of all the emails and all the engagement and all the love that you've got for your emails when you were on the previous platform. And so when you first move to a new platform, you're importing thousands, in most cases, right? Thousands of people's contact details into this new platform. And so that platform needs to be very careful and gather evidence. Are you actually legally allowed to be emailing these people? Did you get their email addresses ethically? And are people very interested in what it is that you are sending? Because deliverability of your emails is impacted by those factors, right? So if you have a reputation of spamming people, sending far too many emails, you get super high unsubscribe rates. When your email service sends out your emails, it will be impacted on whether it goes into the junk folder, whether it goes into the promotions tab, whether it goes into the actual inbox, and whether the images are sent with it, the links are clickable, right? That is actually all impacted by your reputation as an email sender. Now, that reputation is measured by Google for Gmail addresses. That reputation is measured by your other email hosts, and that reputation is measured by your sending reputation with your email service provider. So my recommendation is when you do choose to move to a new email platform, ensure that number one, you let your list know that that is coming up and ask them to ensure that they check that they are still getting your emails, because they might have been getting your emails to their inbox on the last one, but when you move to a new platform, now all of a sudden your emails are going to junk again because it's going through a different server, or your emails are going to the promotions tab. So you don't want your audience going, oh, Tash hasn't sent me an email in like 3 months, because they assumed that your emails were going to continue coming into their inbox. They don't know that you've moved platforms, right? So number one, before you move, send an email to your mailing list and let them know, I'm going to be moving service providers, and that means my email that I send next Tuesday may go to your junk inbox or to your promotions tab. So please ensure that you look out for my email next Tuesday to make sure it's still coming to your inbox. I also would say, plus, as a little favor to me, if you can open that email, that will help me reassure my service provider that I'm a good email sender, right? So you can even let people know what that's going to be about. Then for the first couple of emails that you send to your list from that new email platform, I would recommend making sure it's really juicy and valuable, and it's not a promo period. Don't do it while you're in launch of something. Don't do it when you're like hard pushing a bunch of in-person events or those sorts of things. Find a space where you've got a couple of weeks where you can just send really great, valuable emails to people, and it's light on promo or has no promo, because that's going to help you to get good open rates and good click-through rates rather than your regular open and click-through rates. So it's going to just get that really good reputation as a sender quickly. If you get a really big unsubscribe rate from the first email that you send out from a new provider, and I'm talking like 10 to 15%, you may be excluded from sending emails until you provide the evidence that you have permission to be emailing those people. And so, you'll need to provide that evidence from your previous platform, right? It's like, here's where they opted in, here's the thing. So before you cancel your old provider, send out your first couple of emails from the new one, and make sure that you download all of the data on those people, not just their name and email address, but also how did they subscribe, when did they subscribe. Make sure that you download that. So that's your evidence of their permission, right? Their consent to be sending them emails. So make sure that you just have those things sorted. That's why I would recommend getting someone to help you with it. Just pay a systems expert or a transfer expert, someone to help you with it, because they know all of these things and they know to look out for these things, and they will be able to set you up successfully. Now, actually, I say that, but actually I had someone move mine and they didn't know those things. So check that they know those things. So just check in with them before you hire them and say, do you have strategies to ensure great deliverability, low unsubscribe rates, and ensuring I have the evidence I need to take out of that before I cancel my membership. So just make sure you check in with those things before hiring someone. Don't make an assumption like I did. That's a good point, Tash. Okay, so we'll make sure that I link to episode 309 in the show notes as well, which is about the other one. Like, how do you choose which platform you're moving to? And the final thing I would just say on that is, I understand this tension between, well, right now I just need this, but I'm assuming that in a few months I'm going to need this and this. I would picture it like moving house, right? Moving house is a big deal. And so you wouldn't, whilst you are trying to have a child, go and buy and move into a house that's not going to be suitable for having a child, right? You thinking a little bit into the future because of the disruption and the effort that's required to buy and move into a new home. It's the same with moving email service providers. Whilst it's fairly simple and straightforward, you don't want to be moving every 6 months, and you do want to be taking into consideration what's going to be happening for you over the next 12 to 18 months. So if you feel like in 12 to 18 months you're going to need an all-in-one platform, move to an all-in-one platform now. If you feel like in 12 to 18 months you're going to need a lot of those tools and things that features that only come when you go to a certain platform, move to that certain platform now. So I would say, like, if you think of it like moving house, I would hate to move house more than once a year, right? Nowadays, I'd like even say I'd prefer not to move house more than once every 5 years, but it's the same. I use the same kind of time frame when it comes to moving my list. So I would say 12 to 18 months is probably the window I would be thinking about, because I wouldn't want to move again within the next 12 to 18 months. So think about if you're going to move now, think about, well, what are you going to need in 12 to 18 months? Move to something that has all of that now so that you don't have to move again. So that would be my advice on that one. So that's part A of today's podcast episode. But I also want to answer this question, like, is it appropriate to bribe people onto your mailing list with like a free training or a free template for something? Or is that yucky? Is that actually coming from a space of fear and scarcity and tricking people? Well, I have 7 little pieces of advice on this and some things to think about. Number 1 is consent-based marketing is absolutely my jam. Like, I am someone who I don't just focus on, am I legally allowed to send this person an email? Have I fulfilled my legal obligations to get this person on my list? I also look at it through the lens of consent, right? Informed, enthusiastic consent. Does this person want to hear from me? And so all of the ways that I set up bringing people onto my mailing list are formed not just through the lens of legal consent, but through the lens of informed, enthusiastic consent. So the strategies that I use and that I teach come through that lens. And that for me does include having opt-ins and lead magnets where people need to give me their email address to access it. Now, number 2, of course, be transparent and get that informed consent. So, there's statements that I would expect that you would make so that people know that that's going to happen. For example, if you sign up to one of my webinars, at the bottom it says, by signing up to this webinar, you will also be added to my mailing list to receive relevant advice and offers from time to time. You can unsubscribe from that at any time, right? So people know that they're going to be added to my mailing list, but they also know that if they don't want to receive those, they can unsubscribe from that straight away, right? So for me, that's not just being legally covering that consent piece. It's being transparent about what is going to happen. And actually, that is a legal requirement if you are a business based in Australia. There are different rules for different places around the world. GDPR in the European Union is even more specific about what is required and what level of consent is required. So, of course, number 2, we do want to be transparent about what's happening with those people's information. Number 3 is, but being clear on what they consented to. And this is where the reasonable person test comes into play. If I sign up for a free template from you, would it be reasonable for me to expect that you are then going to email me every day from there? I would argue, no, that is not reasonable. If I sign up for a 5-day challenge, is it reasonable for me to expect I'll get an email from you for every day of that challenge? Yes, it is. So there are certain cases where daily emails would be reasonable, and there are certain cases where daily emails would not be reasonable. So be clear and pay attention to and make a decision about what is it actually that they are consenting to here, and Is that something that would be a reasonable expectation? Reasonable. So when people sign up to my webinars and I say you'll be on my mailing list, you'll receive relevant information, advice, tips and offers in my newsletter. You can unsubscribe anytime. They're going to get a reminder email about the webinar. That's reasonable to expect. They're going to get an email with the replay of the webinar. That's reasonable to expect. They're going to get some follow-up emails, usually 3, maybe 4 follow-up emails to remind them to watch the replay, to let them know about how we can keep working together, to continue their momentum in the thing that I covered in my webinar. Is that reasonable to expect? Yes. The number of emails I send after a webinar is usually 3 to 4 emails across 7 to 10 days. Is that reasonable? Yes. But there are certain launch strategies, webinar programs that say send 17 emails in 5 days after the webinar. I don't think that's reasonable. So just ask that question, like, what exactly did they consent to? And is it a reasonable expectation? Like, is that matching up with what I think? I think it's also different between different niches. So if your niche are people who are in online business and they are doing their marketing every single week, then is it reasonable to get a weekly email from you helping them with their marketing? Yes. But if someone bought a pair of jeans from you and they buy jeans twice a year, is it reasonable for them to receive a weekly email from you trying to upsell them or send them more jeans or more? I don't know, right? I would expect that if it was something like that, people could decide how often they would hear from you if you wanted to email them every week. I've bought swimwear before and I've received daily follow-up emails encouraging me to buy more swimwear. I just bought 4 pieces from you. I'm not in the market for more. Like I haven't even received the ones I purchased. And so I think this is a real opportunity for discernment. Now, I also understand in my circles, right, in the heart-centered business circles, people in my audience, you're more likely to err on the side of emailing less often and assuming less often rather than more often. So that's where I think it's really powerful to have a mentor or have someone helping you who can help you work out what feels like a good amount and what feels reasonable, because you're likely to defer to less often. Whereas if we were to look at it objectively, I think you could probably get away with a little bit more often than you assume. So that is tip number 3. What did they consent to? And put the reasonable person's test to that. Number 4, check your mindset. So if you are perceiving that offering someone a checklist in return for their email is bribing them, then chances are your mindset is, I need to trick people in order to get them onto my mailing list, right? I have to offer something up in order for people to want to get my emails. Your mindset is, people don't want to receive my weekly newsletter, so I have to trick them into getting it. I don't know that that's a particularly helpful mindset. And I actually don't think that that's the case either. So when it comes to having people on your mailing list, the first thing to check is your mindset about emailing your mailing list and your mindset around what they perceive and what they feel when they get an email from you. I have always created my emails through the lens of my audience wants my advice. My audience wants to hear from me. My audience values my opinion. My audience values the content that I send them. And so when it comes to offering lead magnets or opt-ins or webinars, I'm coming from that place, right? Like, yes, the webinar may be the initial motivation for someone jumping on my list, but they'll want to stay on my list because the emails that I'm sending are really valuable for them. They'll want to stay on my list because they see that as adding value to the thing that they initially signed up for, continuing to learn in the same topic area, right? So really, the first question that we want to ask is like, overall, do you believe that your audience wants to hear from you? Overall, do you believe that your audience finds your opinions and advice valuable? And if you don't believe that, then how on earth are they going to believe it? And if you don't believe it, you will feel like you need to use trickery and bribery and weird tactics to trick people onto your mailing list, to lure people onto your mailing list. But I don't ever feel like I'm luring people onto my mailing list because I inherently believe that what I send to my mailing list helps them. And they actually want to hear it and they want to receive it. And if you're on my mailing list, I would assume you want to hear from me. You value listening to this podcast. You value being able to know when I'm running free workshops. I have people who, even though they've done both my takeoff program and my leverage and launch program, they still come to every single webinar that I run because they just know that they're going to get something. They know it's really valuable to them. And if I didn't email them to tell them that there was a webinar coming up, I know they'd be cranky at me for not telling them. So I really think there's a big mindset piece in there around people want to hear from you. And I know it comes from like way back in your history. It comes from the patriarchy. It comes from upbringing and inner child stuff. It's not just your belief about your business that is impacting on that resistance or that underlying mindset that I'm annoying people when I email them. So, it's not just a matter of like, you're silly, change your mindset, right? I totally understand that there's a lot to unpack in there, but I think it's worth doing the work in uncovering where has this come from and why do you believe no one wants to hear from you and how do you clear that out, because that's going to come up over and over again throughout your business journey and block your ability to be seen and heard and visible and help people. Something I say inside the Takeoff program is you can't help 100,000 people if 100,000 people don't know who you are. You can't change 100,000 people's lives without having 100,000 people see you. You have to be seen. You have to be visible. That's part and parcel of being in this type of business. And so if you've got stuff around visibility or your opinion's not wanted or you annoy people, invest in getting that sorted, whether that be time and or money, because that mindset stuff is big. Number 5, you can actually choose the level of consent that you gain to ensure someone's on your mailing list. So you can actually have extra steps to ensure that people want to hear from you if you feel particularly off about adding someone to your mailing list because they signed up for something. So, this is a requirement for GDPR anyway. So if you're sending emails to anyone in the European Union, there needs to be an additional confirmation of informed consent, right? So they need to do something to actively say, yes, I want to be on your mailing list, right? Not just, yes, I want to come to your webinar, but yes, I want to be on your mailing list. So email sequence systems are set up so you can have a checkbox that says, yep, please enroll me in the webinar. And then another checkbox that says, and please add me to your mailing list. So if you're particularly concerned, you can actually do that. It doesn't have to be a checkbox. It can also just be words. So it could also be that you are upfront about the value of being on your mailing list or why you want them to be on your mailing list. So I've opted in for things before where it says, hey, not only do I want to send you this super valuable resource, I also want to share my best tips and advice about how to on a regular basis. So by opting in here, you'll also be able to receive my newsletter every week. Of course, if you don't want it, you can always unsubscribe. So think about how positive that feels versus, oh, I'm sorry. When you sign up to this, I'm going to put you on my mailing list, but don't worry, you can unsubscribe, right? You get to choose not only your belief and your mindset, you also get to choose how you communicate that consent and how much you ask of them to say yes to receiving that. Now, as someone who signs up to a lot of mailing lists and unsubscribes from a lot of mailing lists, I'm like in and out, I fluctuate, right? But it's not a personal thing when I unsubscribe from a mailing list. I'm just like, nah, I don't need that for a while. I can resubscribe whenever I want to, so that's fine. I don't like a double opt-in, right? Those things where you have to opt in and then it says, okay, now you have to go to your inbox and confirm it. I reckon I would confirm it less than half of the time. Not because I wasn't keen or I didn't want it or whatever it might be, but mostly because I sign up for most things on my phone and I don't have all of my inboxes on my phone because I don't like having all of those unread emails in my face when I pick up my phone. So it means I have to go and find my laptop and remember to go and look for that thing and say yes to it. And so for me, it's an ease thing that I can sign up to a webinar and I know that I'm signing up, I'll be on the mailing list and I can unsubscribe if I want to. So from my perspective, as someone who potentially might be signing up to your list, I don't love having to jump through hoops to prove to you that I want your emails. So I think it's also a matter of like finding a happy medium for you. Yes, it would feel very scrumptious to know that every single person on your mailing list is there because they actively want to receive your emails and that's the only reason that they're there. But I also think it's a balancing act because you're making an assumption that they don't want to receive your emails unless they jump through all of those hoops. And I want to receive your emails. I just am lazy and I don't have my emails on my phone. And so like if you make it hard for me, I might not go to the effort, particularly if it's the first time I've heard of you or the first time I'm jumping on your mailing list. I don't know you well enough to know that your newsletters are going to be valuable and it's worth me getting up off the couch and going to my office and getting my laptop and doing the double opt-in thing. And so, yeah, I think it's just a matter of knowing that you can choose the level of consent that you create. You can use a double opt-in if you want to. And that sometimes it's just the tone of your words that creates that excitement for people to want to be on your mailing list as well. Number 6, my unsubscribe rate from my mailing list is under 1% per month. So that number tells me the people who are on my mailing list, 99% of them want to be there. So for me, if I was having an opt-in and it got people onto my mailing list and then 30% of those people unsubscribed when they got my first newsletter, I would feel like there's a missing link in the chain here because that doesn't feel like it was informed consent and they were excited to be on my mailing list, right? Like if my unsubscribe rate significantly spikes, then yes, I feel like there's something I can address to ensure that it's not perceived as trickery or bribing people onto my mailing list to lure them in to get my newsletters. But until that unsubscribe, I've never had it. I've never ever had it. If that happens, I would look at, well, where did most of those people come into my mailing list? And how can I ensure that consent is far more informed? Or if it happens, I've had VIP clients where this has happened. And what's happened is those people came in on a Facebook ad that was targeting the wrong audience. And so the audience that were signing up to the freebie wanted the freebie, but it was disconnected from what was being shared in the newsletter, and it was disconnected from what the business was about overall. And so, yes, it was a freebie that they could get lots of opt-ins to their mailing list through, but it was getting opt-ins from people who weren't their ideal clients, who weren't wanting to be in their audience. The opt-in was one that they had built with another mentor, and that was their concern, right? They're like, I don't think that this is actually like necessarily the right fit for my audience. And the mentor was like, no, but you get all this list growth. And if people don't want your newsletter, they'll unsubscribe. But like, she was getting 35% of people unsubscribing the first time that they got a newsletter from her. So it was a really clear sign that it was the wrong people that were coming in onto lists. And rather than have a 30% unsubscribe rate, like, why don't we create something that's going to be a value to the world, so that you don't get into the mindset of, I know that a bunch of people receiving this don't want it. Instead, let's get you to the point where you know that not only do the majority of people who receive this want it, like 99% of people who receive this actually want it. So numbers can also tell you to what extent it is a disconnect, or the consent isn't as informed and enthusiastic as you would like. Now, number 7, my final piece of advice is, do what feels right to you, but pay attention to why. For a lot of people, the reason why they don't want to email their mailing list every week is because they don't want to be like those marketers that send 17 emails in 3 days. But you're not sending 17 emails in 3 days, you're sending 1 email a week. So yes, if you want to send less emails to your mailing list, or you want to have more hoops that people jump through to get to your mailing list, or, I've seen out there's even people who teach the strategy of no opt-ins, no incentives to be on the list. People only get to be on your mailing list if they want to be on your mailing list. They literally are just signing up, join the mailing list, right? That is totally a legitimate strategy. But I would pay attention to why you are driven to only allow people to join your list that way, and why you are driven to reduce the number of emails that you're sending out to your mailing list. Because if it's simply a matter of, 1, you don't believe people want to hear from you, or 2, you are trying to avoid being like other marketers, or 3, you are worried that you're going to be annoying them, right? Like if that's the driver for changing your strategy, then let's address that first before going off and hiding and becoming less visible and reducing the growth of your mailing list by an adjustment of the strategy. So I'm not attached to how you do it. I'm totally open to you choosing a strategy that works for you. I have no problem with supporting people to find ways to grow their mailing list without opt-ins. I have done that, but we just want to be clear on the drivers and the reasons why, and ensure that it's not coming from a space of fear or hiding, or not wanting to be visible, or resistance or rejection of other types of marketing. The way you market is different to the way that those people market. The types of emails you send are different to the types of emails that those people send. And so you don't need to be the exact opposite of them. You just need to be a consent-based, considerate version of them who applies the reasonable person test. And reasonable person is not that one person who replied and said, your emails are annoying, I don't want them, right? If I changed my strategy and my behaviors based on those emails, I would never email you. I would never send emails to my mailing list. I've had people reply to my newsletter saying, you are the most self-centered person I have ever experienced online in my life. Please stop emailing me, right? They could have just clicked the unsubscribe, but that's fine. So if I then changed all of the things that I did because one person called me self-centered, then I feel like I'm putting my attention and energy on the wrong person, because that's not how most of my audience perceive me. And if I was afraid of being perceived as self-centered, I might stop sharing behind the scenes insights into my business that I know my audience really value. If I was doing everything through the lens of, I don't want to come across as self-centered because I want to win over that person's approval, I might not talk about the things I'm excited about in my business, or the things that I've got coming up, or I might not share a little story about Munchkin that I know people love hearing those stories about Munchkin. And so, just pay attention to who you're listening to as well, right? Are you changing your behaviors to please the 1% of people who you will never win over anyway? Or are you focusing the way that you set up your list growth, the way that you speak to your audience and your behaviors and strategies on the majority of people who love you, want to hear from you, signed up because they're interested in working with you or at least getting the outcome that you deliver in your services, and they're happy for you to be emailing them and giving them updates and all of those sorts of things as well. All right, so now that we've all done all of that, I would love to also share with you a free resource that will help you to grow your mailing list and grow your audience really beautifully. It's called Grow Your Audience, and I'll make sure I pop the link to that with the show notes of today's episode over at tashcorbin.com/352. Now, when you opt in to that Grow Your Audience training, it will also add you to my mailing list. But as you've probably taken from today's podcast episode, if you're not already on there, it's a really valuable mailing list to be part of. The emails that you receive from me are very considered. Then you're not going to be spammed over and over again, and you can unsubscribe at any time. So if you want to go and check it all out, make sure that you go to the show notes of today's episode at tashcorbin.com/352. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the Heart Centered Business Podcast. And until next time, I cannot wait to see you shine. Bye for now. Would you like more tips, tools, and resources to help you grow your heart-centered business? Head to tashcorbin.com today.